always popular, but it was hard, it would have been hard back then to imagine 40 years.
All right, so with it being the 40-year anniversary of what I consider one of the greatest horror comedies ever made.
How does it feel 40 years later with this film still being one of, probably one of the greatest horror comedies, in my opinion, and many people's opinions?
I mean, it's really gratifying. It was the first movie that I made, professional movie. And I came out to Hollywood to do that. And I really gambled a lot. I put up all my money and borrowed money.
To me, it was all about trying to make, within our limitations, the best movie possible. And to think out of the box, to do stuff that other people weren't doing.
Figured I would revisit Reanimator, since it was like the 5th or 6th video I did on the channel 3 years ago. So Reanimator from '85, directed by the great Stuart Gordon, and he was one of the kings when it came to adapting H.P. Lovecraft.
And I just thought it was real special while we were doing it, and from the time we first showed it, it just worked. Of course, in most largest part to Stuart Gordon's ability as a director, as a storyteller.
Which I've read a decent amount of Lovecraft stuff. I haven't read Herbert West Reanimator by Lovecraft, but I've heard from a lot of people that are like enthusiasts that it's one of his lesser regarded stories. But Stuart Gordon just had such a great, unique directing style. And this was his feature film debut, after primarily working in theater. Originally, Gordon wanted to do this story for the stage. And then they decided to maybe do a TV pilot, and maybe it would turn into a series. And that's when Stuart Gordon was introduced to Brian Yuzna, and they ended up working it into a feature film. And we have an amazing cast in this film of people that went on to become horror icons and legends in the genre. We have Jeffrey Combs playing Dr. Herbert West, which is one of my favorite performances in a horror film of all time. And I believe he didn't read much Lovecraft or anything like that. And he decided to just take this role because he figured no one would see it. He needed work. Kind of like a Betsy Palmer situation where she needed a car, so she did Friday the 13th. But Jeffrey Combs' way of just getting into a character, and especially this one of Herbert West, I can't picture anybody else playing the role. He played the role in both sequels, Bride of Reanimator in 1990 and 2003 was Beyond Reanimator, both directed by Brian Yuzna, the producer of this. Then we have Bruce Abbott, who plays Dan Cain, and he gives a really great performance too. We have David Gale, who is the arch nemesis of Herbert West, and flat out tries to steal his work and his reagent. Then we have Barbara Crampton as Meg, the daughter of the dean, who is engaged to Bruce Abbott's character, Dan. This is the movie that launched Barbara's career in the horror genre and became a horror icon. Her performance is great in this. She was so gorgeous in this film and to this day. Like, she has aged like a fine wine. And then we have Dennis Paoli, who co-wrote this and co-wrote or wrote a ton of Stuart Gordon films and a lot of the Lovecraft stuff. He's somebody I don't think gets enough credit when it comes to his work with Stuart Gordon and Brian Yuzna and all of the aforementioned people. Because the talent involved with this film, you have Charles Band's company, Empire, who distributed the film.
We stretched the envelope a lot, where we could.
You have Brian Yuzna, who started the entire thing and produced it, and he went on to direct Society, the Dentist films, Necronomicon, which also stars Jeffrey Combs playing H.P. Lovecraft.
I wish I owned Necronomicon. I know that
was another one. Yeah, that's another one you did.
Would just get an audience. If they could see it, there'd be a shitload of people that would like that movie.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not saying it's a great movie. I'm just saying there's what's not to like. Jeffrey Combs as H.P. Lovecraft as a almost an action hero.
Combs always kills it in every movie, but honestly, my second favorite performance by Jeffrey Combs, next to, Herbert West in Reanimator, is from 2012's Would You Rather, which is a very underrated movie. His over-the-top, eccentric, rich asshole character is so much fun, and it looked like he had a blast doing it too. I don't really know anyone who's a horror fan who hasn't seen Reanimator. But in case you haven't, we have Combs playing Herbert West, who develops a reagent that allows him to reanimate dead corpses and bring the dead back to life. And as you could imagine, things go terribly wrong for West, for Dan Cain, for Meg, for everybody. And I think Lovecraft even said about the story, which was released in the 20s, something like that he didn't really care for it, and he was basically just making a parody of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. But that's how this film is. It is a mad scientist movie. The character of Herbert West is so eccentric and deadpan and extremely intelligent.
I was thinking, well, here's this genius guy, right, in medical school, but he's totally psycho, and he
doesn't like authority.
Exactly, all of this stuff, and I'm going, geez, and so I'm thinking horror films or suspense films. I'm going, in all of film history, what are some of the films that are the most iconic in the sense of true psycho type people, and Psycho kept coming to mind.
But like most people, power and greed and ego gets in the way and messes everything up. Same parallel with David Gale's character. He wants the same stuff. He's driven by different motivations. He cares only really about the power and the fame of being able to steal West's reagent and pass it off as his own invention, his own discovery. So Dr. Hill's driving force behind his actions is greed and power and fame. West looks at himself like a serious scientist. He's in this for the science. He wants to take every little note there is. He is full of passion when it comes to his work. You don't mess with Herbert West's work. All of the effects work is excellent in this movie. The opening scene with the guy's eyes exploding out of his head and the blood splatters on the woman's face, that's hysterical. Which is another thing about this movie. It originally started off not as a horror comedy. It's a straight horror film.
First of all, Reanimator as a film, people see it as what it is today. But originally, there was a little bit of a while there where Stuart and Brian, the intent was to make Reanimator a truly scary horror film.
Without the campiness to it.
Correct.
So even with the gore and the effects work and the kills and the disturbing sequences throughout this movie, it still has that comedic tone to it. It still has that over-the-top feel where it's not hyper-realistic, is what I'm trying to say. It has that charm to it.
The times have changed. I think when it first came out, it was like super gory. We've gone so far from that I think even for just regular audiences that aren't horror audiences, or gore hounds or something, they don't, it's still bloody, but it's not, that isn't the main thing. That's
exactly.
But it's still edgy. It's still, it still crosses the line.
And then we have the score by Richard Band, which was built off of the idea and framework of Bernard Herrmann's Psycho score. But yet the score here that Band did for Reanimator has become iconic in its own right.
I know that Bernard Herrmann was a big influence, obviously, with the Reanimator score.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It was your little riff on Herrmann's Psycho.
You're definitely my riff. You had a sort of a a genius guy and the psycho part, and I'm saying to myself, well, what could the audience identify with immediately, right? And that's where I came up with copying a small part of at least the feel of that famous psycho, and I made it into like a quirky version, right, of that psycho thing. The themes were all mine, but that string motif that I used was definitely a Bernard Herrmann-ish type thing.
And all of the cast and characters have great chemistry in this also. Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Crampton, which I'll get to in a second. Bruce Abbott and Barbara Crampton. And David Gale. All of Dr. Hill and West's tit for tats that they go on together, and the insults. Who's gonna believe a talking head get a job in a sideshow? What a great line that is. And the third act of this movie just dials everything up to 11. And so much of the comedy works for me in this movie. This is, along with Evil Dead 2, I think the two greatest horror comedies ever made. After West cuts off Hill's head with the shovel, laid to rest, which is a similar kill and effect that we saw from another movie that same year, from Romero's Day of the Dead. But then West takes his head and he's trying to get it to, stand up in the tray. It keeps falling over. Then he takes one of those, the things that the sharp objects that you put the notes on. I don't know that technical term, but they're dangerous as shit. If you've seen Intruder from '89, you know. And he takes Hill's head and just sticks it on top of that to keep the head up. The note about the cat being dead. So much great humor. And that's another thing. The effect of the cat coming back to life and the sound it makes. Sound design's excellent in this movie too. But the shriek that cat makes. Oh, there's something about it. The whole finale of the film in the morgue with the overdose and tentacles come out of the dude. Of course, it's a Lovecraft adaptation. There's always fucking tentacles somewhere. And I really have to say this, and I always do. For Barbara Crampton to have read the script for this, I don't know if that giving head, as it's called, scene was in the script yet, but for an actress who was mostly doing soap operas, I know she did De Palma's Body Double. She was in the year or so before this, but for an actress starting their career and only doing a few feature films at that point, to be able to read that script and that scene and go through with it and take that role and be able to do as well as you do, I've always said that was such a brave choice by Crampton to take that role, knowing that scene was there. I know a lot of actresses would probably shy right away from that. As soon as they read that scene, I'm out. But not her. She went all in for that. All in for the role, and it's no surprise that Stuart Gordon had her and Jeffrey Combs back. Dennis Paoli writing again with From Beyond, and From Beyond was actually filmed after Stuart Gordon's Dolls, but for some reason they ended up releasing From Beyond first.
The other piece of art and poster that I had that I said, Stuart, we got to make this movie, was a movie called Dolls. And Dolls is one of my favorite puppet and doll movies. When I told Stuart we were going to, I had a studio for some years in Italy. I said, Stuart, this is after Reanimator, we were preparing From Beyond. I said, Stuart, when you get to Italy, there's some cool sets built already in the studio. We do a quickie before we shoot From Beyond. And he goes, well, maybe. I said, well, you're going to be over there and your family, and From Beyond's complicated. Why don't we do a real quickie, cool movie? And I pulled out the poster, and it was, the poster of Dolls, which pretty much survived as the poster of Dolls to the bitter end.
And that brings me back to what I was saying about the talent involved with this film. Stuart Gordon, Jeffrey Combs, and Barbara Crampton, for me, are among, if not the best trio in horror. There was only a handful of films the three of them worked on together, but every single one is a horror classic. Every one is one that I love in so many ways. From Beyond right after this, Castle Freak in 95, which reunited the three of them again. It's like one of the holy trinities of horror. But it also extends out, of course, to Charles Band, Richard Band, Brian Yuzna, the whole creative team. And Dennis Paoli would continue to go on writing and co-writing stuff for both Gordon and for Brian Yuzna. Dagon from 2001, I think, is such an underrated Stuart Gordon film. And Paoli wrote the screenplay for that.
I actually got Dennis to write the script to Dagon immediately after it was during, just right after Reanimator.
And even more recently, like 2 years ago or so, 2023, Suitable Flesh was written by Paoli, directed by Joe Lynch, great director, and starred Heather Graham and Barbara Crampton, another Lovecraftian film, and I really enjoyed that one too. So it's good to see Paoli still continue to be writing stuff. Oh, and the scene, the comedy, I keep saying, is great for this. After that scene when he kills Dr. Hill with the shovel, and then fails to hold his head up and sticks it on the whatever spike. The scene when Dr. Hill sneaks into the morgue wearing that ridiculous costume with the obvious paper mache fake head to get past the security guard. Oh, that's so funny. I die every time. So just to recap, this movie is a masterpiece in my opinion. It is one of two movies I consider the greatest horror comedies ever made. The directing by Gordon is fantastic. Especially impressive that it was his directorial debut. Brian Yuzna's contribution, there wouldn't be a Reanimator if it was not for Brian Yuzna. And all the work that he went on to do, keeping the legacy alive and keeping this franchise going with the aforementioned Bride of Reanimator a few years later and Beyond Reanimator. Plus all the movies that he directed that I mentioned, Dennis Paoli writing, Charles Band, Richard Band. I mean, it goes on and on with the talent in this film and the performances, the actors and actresses as well. And this would continue into From Beyond the following year, and all of this great work by all of these individuals and everyone in the Full Moon family.
If you don't have a piece of art and a title that is compelling, you don't have anything.
Then we got Dolls, and then after the Empire era ended is when Charles Band formed Full Moon Features, which was it Full Moon Pictures originally, or was it Full Moon Entertainment? I forget which was the first one. It's Features now. I always confuse them. There's been a lot of name changes, and I always just say Full Moon. Castle Freak is actually my favorite Full Moon picture, like under the actual Full Moon banner. Not counting the Empire films or Charles Band productions like Tourist Trap.
He walked in, you had the poster of, already for Castle Freak, and just said it has to have a castle and a freak, and then you can do whatever you want.
That's it. To me, the title and the art is the window into what you hope will be a good movie. So yes, Castle Freak was exactly that.
And I'll end with this. I think the ending to this movie has a very beautiful message. After that whole overdose scene and the tentacles and shit, like I said, Dan and Meg get the hell out of there and try to get to the elevator to go from the morgue where they're at up to the actual hospital. And she ends up getting attacked and strangled. And we see earlier in the movie, Dan, he's a med student and he has a hard time knowing when to call it quits. He has a hard time accepting that. And it's established very early on, like in the first scene of the movie, I think, after the credits. And because he can't deal with Meg being gone and that he can't bring her back and she's actually dead, he starts doing what most people, 99.999% of us, would do. Try anything, no matter what the cost, to bring back somebody that you love. Whether it's just to say goodbye that you never had the chance, for one more talk, for one more smile, for one more laugh. That is something I think everybody can relate to. And after all the shit, insanity that Dan sees in this movie with Herbert West, his whole agent. Meg was his fiance, and he zombified her father. The bloodbath at the end in the morgue, tentacles, like I said. After all that, he's still willing to use that reagent on Meg to bring her back. And I think that says a lot about all of us. We would all do anything for one last chance to say goodbye or to see a loved one again. So, a beautiful ending and message to a classic masterpiece of a horror film. But obviously you can tell how much I hold this film in high regard and how much respect I have for everyone involved and all the talent that made this film possible. So that's Reanimator from '85. Happy anniversary to the film and to everybody who has worked on it and was able to bring it to us. 4 decades later, it's still going strong as one of the greatest horror movies. Also a big thank you again to everyone at Full Moon or friends of Full Moon or worked with them. Charlie, Richard, Brian, Ted Dinkelau, Andrew Devoff, Chris Alexander. Thank all of you guys for taking the time to come on the channel in the past and talk about all these great movies. I just need Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Crampton. Barbara, if you happen to see this, come on, it's about time now, right? And congratulations on 40 years of Reanimator.
That's how it was born, basically. And you know, obviously in the long run, all worked out.
But it's just a good movie. That's really